So here's the thing about Formula One that most people don't realize. It's not just about who wins races, it's about who makes the smartest moves off the track. And honestly, sometimes those decisions matter way more than pole positions ever will. Max Verstappen is one of the greatest drivers on the planet, arguably the most talented pilot we've seen in decades, and yet right now, he's sitting in 7th place in the championship standings, with just 76 points after 9 races into the 2026 season, which is genuinely shocking when you think about what we're used to seeing from him. I mean, this is the same guy who dominated the grid for years, who broke records left and right, who made driving look so effortless that casual fans almost thought anyone could do it. But now he's 7th. That's not just a bad season, that's a crisis for Red Bull. And honestly, it's waking people up to the reality that even the best drivers in the world aren't immune to problems with machinery, problems with regulations, and problems with adapting when the entire sport changes directions. Meanwhile, his rivals are pulling away, and the rumor mill has gone absolutely berserk about where he might end up next, with everyone from casual F1 fans to industry insiders wondering if Mercedes, the most successful team in modern Formula One history, might actually be crazy enough to bring him in. But here's where things get interesting, because Guenther Steiner, the former Haas team principal, who knows the sport inside and out, just dropped some serious logic on the Red Flags podcast that makes you wonder if everyone asking this question has actually thought it through at all. Steiner essentially argued that Toto Wolff, Mercedes' legendary team principal, is too smart to make such a move. And you know what? He might actually be right, which is wild because it flies in the face of what social media has been screaming about for weeks now. But before we dive into why this makes so much sense, we need to understand what's actually happening with Max, why Red Bull's struggling this season, and what would actually have to happen for a move like this to make any sense at all. So stick around, because this is one of those stories where the more you dig, the crazier the possibilities actually get. The situation has escalated beyond simple performance issues, and that's what makes this moment so pivotal in F1 history. When you've got a 4-time world champion underperforming, when you've got mechanical failures at major races, when you've got a team as prestigious as Red Bull seemingly unable to solve basic reliability problems, that's when things start shifting in ways that can't be undone. The speculation about transfers isn't random. It's rooted in genuine concerns about whether Verstappen can salvage his championship hopes with Red Bull, or whether he needs to make a dramatic change to reset his career trajectory. Let's start with the current situation, because it's honestly pretty unprecedented to see a driver of Verstappen's caliber struggling like this. Max Verstappen has been synonymous with dominance in recent years, right? The guy's been a machine, constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible in a Formula One car, and yet this season feels different. And I think that's partly because he's been vocal about his frustrations, which honestly shows you how much pressure he's under. During the British Grand Prix, Verstappen experienced a mechanical failure with his rear wing, and his radio communications made it crystal clear he was not happy with the reliability issues plaguing the RB24, which is just embarrassing for a team of Red Bull's caliber, let me be honest. When a 4-time champion is publicly complaining on team radio about his machinery, that's not just a driver being dramatic, that's a symptom of something genuinely wrong within the organization, and it starts raising questions about whether this is just a bad year or whether something more fundamental has shifted within the team's engineering department. The car isn't performing at the level it needs to. The reliability problems are becoming a pattern rather than an isolated incident, and Verstappen's clearly frustrated with the situation, which has naturally led to speculation that he might be looking for an exit strategy. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, and this is important to understand, because Verstappen's issue isn't just about this season being rough, it's about his relationship with these new regulation cars in general, and that's actually a much bigger problem for Red Bull than most people are talking about. The driver who dominated under the previous regulations is finding these new cars difficult, which suggests maybe his driving style, his preferences, or something about how he approaches the technical setup just doesn't align as naturally with this new generation of machinery. Think about it. These new 2026 regulations fundamentally changed how cars handle, how power is distributed, how the aerodynamics work, and not every driver adapts at the same speed. Some drivers thrive immediately, others need months to adjust, and some might never fully adapt, and that's a harsh reality that even champions have to face. That's actually super telling, because it means his struggles aren't necessarily temporary, they could be structural, and that changes everything about how we should think about potential moves. If Verstappen Verstappen can't figure out how to drive these new cars effectively, switching teams won't magically solve that problem unless the new team can build something specifically designed around his preferences and driving style. The reliability issues compound this problem significantly. According to reports coming from the paddock, Red Bull has been dealing with unexpected technical gremlins that have cost them valuable points and testing opportunities. When a driver loses track time due to mechanical failures, when they can't properly evaluate setup changes because the car keeps breaking down, when they're constantly frustrated with equipment problems rather than being able to focus on performance optimization, that's when confidence starts eroding. And Verstappen's confidence is clearly taking a hit. He's used to having a championship-winning car underneath him, and now he's got a car that's unreliable and doesn't suit his driving style. That's a double whammy that would frustrate any driver, no matter how experienced they are. The question becomes, is this Red Bull's fault, or is this a sign that Verstappen simply can't adapt to the new era of Formula One? And that question is crucial because it determines whether moving him to another team would actually solve anything at all. So naturally, when a driver of Verstappen's caliber starts underperforming, the rumor mill doesn't take long to spin up, and suddenly everyone's connecting dots and throwing names out there: Mercedes, McLaren, and basically anyone with sufficient resources and competitive machinery. It's the nature of Formula One, right? The moment something goes wrong, everyone assumes the solution is a massive transfer, and it becomes this feeding frenzy of speculation and what-if scenarios that take on a life of their own on social media. But here's where Steiner's argument becomes really compelling, because he basically asked a question that should be obvious but somehow isn't being asked enough. Why would Mercedes actually want to destabilize what they've already got going? Think about this logically for a second. Mercedes has George Russell in one seat, a genuinely talented driver who's proven himself consistently. And they've got Kimi Antonelli leading the entire championship right now with 179 points, which means they've already got their superstar in place. They've already got their championship contender, and they've already got their young prospect developing brilliantly. So bringing in Verstappen isn't about getting a better driver than what they have. It's about paying significantly more money to potentially create internal drama, conflict, and instability that could actually damage the championship-winning environment they've already built. And look, I know we all love the idea of seeing two absolutely elite drivers in the same team battling it out, like Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso at McLaren back in 2007. But the reality is that Verstappen's salary demands are absolutely astronomical compared to what Russell or Antonelli command. We're talking about potentially tens of millions of dollars difference annually. So you're looking at a massive financial commitment that doesn't actually improve your championship position. It might actually make things significantly worse because now you've got resource allocation issues. If you're paying Verstappen premium wages, those resources aren't going to aerodynamics development. They're not going to engine upgrades. They're not going to simulator time optimization. You've got team management challenges because now you've got to make sure both drivers feel valued and supported equally, which is incredibly difficult when one driver is earning multiple times what the other's earning. And you've got two drivers with massive egos who might not play nicely together in the way that maximizes your overall performance. It's just basic math, and Steiner's right that Toto Wolff would see through this immediately, because Wolff's built his entire reputation on making intelligent, calculated decisions that maximize Mercedes' advantage, rather than creating problems that don't need to be created. Consider the precedent this would set within the team. Russell would see Verstappen coming in at significantly higher wages and would naturally feel undervalued, which could create resentment and tension that bleeds into on-track performance. Antonelli, who's having an incredible championship-leading season, might feel threatened by the idea of Verstappen being brought in as the headline driver, which could destroy his confidence and momentum at exactly the moment when Mercedes needs that momentum to continue. These aren't hypothetical concerns. They're real human factors that experienced team principals like Wolff have to consider when making transfer decisions. The social dynamics of a Formula One team are incredibly delicate, and one wrong move can unravel years of careful construction and trust building. Wolff has been masterful at keeping Mercedes cohesive and focused, and introducing Verstappen into that mix could very easily break that harmony in irreversible ways. Furthermore, there's the technical question that nobody's talking about enough. Would Verstappen actually want to join Mercedes if it meant potentially being the number 2 driver, or sharing equal status with Russell? Verstappen's used to being the team leader, the guy who gets the best car setup, the guy whose preferences shape team strategy. At Mercedes, would he get that? Unlikely. Mercedes would need to balance resources between Russell and Antonelli while also trying to manage Verstappen, and that's a juggling act that doesn't serve anyone's interests effectively. So you've got this situation where even if Mercedes theoretically wanted Verstappen, and even if they had the financial resources, which is debatable given the cost cap regulations, there's no guarantee Verstappen would actually be satisfied with the role he'd be given. Add in the fact that Verstappen has already shown frustration with his current situation, and you've got to wonder if his problems are really fixable with a simple team change, or whether they're more fundamental to how he's adapting to the new regulations. There's also the contract situation to consider. George Russell has a contract with Mercedes, and you don't just break a driver's contract because you want to pursue someone else. There would be significant financial penalties, legal complications, and precedent-setting implications for future negotiations. So unless Russell actively wanted to leave or agreed to a negotiated exit, Mercedes would be stuck paying him while also paying Verstappen, which makes zero financial sense. And Kimi Antonelli, he's signed through multiple years, locked into a long-term Mercedes program, which means he's not going anywhere. So the only realistic scenario where Verstappen could join Mercedes is if George Russell leaves on his own terms, which again isn't something anyone's expecting or predicting. The whole narrative assumes that Verstappen is desperate because he's out to underperform. But what if he's actually content to stay with Red Bull? What if this is just one difficult season in a longer career arc? We don't actually know his thinking here, and that's an important part of this story that gets lost in all the speculation. Now, but maybe he also has faith that Red Bull can turn things around, and maybe he's willing to fight through this difficult period rather than abandoning his current situation for an uncertain future elsewhere. Here's my personal take on this whole situation, and I think it matters because it gets at the heart of why Steiner's argument is so convincing. Running a championship-winning Formula One team is about more than just collecting talent. It's about harmony. It's about trust. It's about having drivers who understand their role within the team structure. And yes, it's about having the resources to give every driver what they need to perform at their absolute highest level. When you bring in a driver like Verstappen who commands astronomical salaries and has sky-high expectations, you're fundamentally changing the dynamic of everything that worked before. And that's a massive risk for a team that's already performing well. Mercedes has built something really special under Toto Wolff. They've got a system that works. They've got drivers who fit within that system. And they've got championship aspirations that are very much alive right now, with Antonelli actually leading the point standings. Throwing Verstappen into that mix would be like throwing a wrench into a machine that's already running smoothly. And yeah, maybe the wrench is made of gold, and maybe it looks impressive, but does it actually make the machine run better? Probably not. And honestly, probably makes things considerably worse. That's the core of what Steiner is saying when he calls Wolff too smart to do this, and I think he's absolutely right. This isn't about Verstappen being a bad driver or anything like that. It's about realistic business calculations and understanding what actually maximizes your championship probability. And sometimes the smartest move is recognizing that you don't need to make a big move at all. Toto Wolff has this incredible ability to see 10 steps ahead where most people only see 2 steps ahead. He understands not just the immediate implications of decisions, but the long-term consequences for team dynamics, for championship contention, for financial sustainability, and for the development of young drivers coming through the pipeline. When Wolff decided not to pursue Verstappen, if that's indeed what's happening, he was making a statement about priorities and about trusting the process that's already working. And that takes real discipline, real confidence, and real strategic vision. Think about what Wolff has accomplished with Mercedes over the years. He's managed the transition from Lewis Hamilton being the absolute superstar of the team to creating an environment where that transition could happen smoothly, where Russell could step up and prove himself as a championship-caliber driver, where Antonelli could be given an opportunity to develop into the next generation of Mercedes champions. That's not easy. That requires not just identifying talent, but understanding how to nurture talent, how to challenge drivers appropriately, and how to structure a team environment that brings out the best in everyone. Bringing in Verstappen would threaten all of that carefully constructed ecosystem. Mercedes' success in recent years, according to reports and analysis from industry experts, has been built on stability and trust. The drivers know their roles, they know what's expected of them, and they know that the team will support them in achieving their goals. That kind of stability is incredibly valuable in Formula One, where things change so rapidly and where pressure is constant. Moreover, Wolff has shown throughout his tenure that he's not afraid to make bold moves when they make strategic sense. He brought in Lewis Hamilton, arguably the GOAT, when that was an unconventional decision. He made tactical changes to the team structure when needed. He's invested in young talent like Antonelli with conviction and patience. So it's not like Wolff is risk-averse or unwilling to make big changes. Rather, it's that he understands the difference between bold moves that actually improve your situation and bold moves that just create drama without solving underlying problems. A move for Verstappen would fall into the latter category, and that's why Steiner's assessment of Wolff's intelligence is so spot on. This is a moment where the smartest team in Formula One is showing restraint, and that restraint is actually its greatest strength. There's also something to be said about the timing of this decision relative to the championship race. Mercedes is currently fighting for the championship with Antonelli leading. If they were to pursue Verstappen, they'd be creating distractions and uncertainty at exactly the moment that Mercedes needs maximum focus and coherence. Every meeting would have extra complications, every strategy decision would have additional layers of complexity, and every resource allocation decision would face new scrutiny. That kind of organizational drag, that kind of distraction, that kind of uncertainty is exactly what a team fighting for a championship cannot afford. Toto Wolff knows this. He's navigated enough championship fights to understand that the teams that win are the ones that maintain clarity of purpose and unity of direction. And bringing in Verstappen would fundamentally compromise both of those things. From a longer-term perspective, Mercedes is also invested in the development trajectory it has established. Russell is in his prime performance years and has shown he can compete for championships. Antonelli is the future of the organization, and every resource Mercedes puts into his development today is an investment in championships 5, 10, even 15 years down the road. If Mercedes wanted to maximize their long-term championship prospects, keeping resources focused on Russell and Antonelli makes far more sense than depleting those resources to accommodate a third driver, even if that third driver is Verstappen. That's the kind of strategic thinking that separates elite organizations from mediocre ones. And that's why Steiner's comment about Wolff being too smart really resonates with anyone who understands high-level team management. Now, let's dig into what would actually have to happen for this whole scenario to flip on its head and become viable, because there is theoretically a pathway where a Verstappen to Mercedes move makes sense, but it requires some very specific dominoes to fall in a very specific order, and honestly, the probability of all those dominoes falling is incredibly low. For starters, George Russell would have to leave Mercedes, which isn't exactly something that's expected or rumored to happen in the near future. But if it did, that's when the equation changes entirely, because suddenly you've got one clear seat. You've got the financial flexibility that comes from not paying two premium drivers, and you've got the opportunity to build around Verstappen as your primary championship asset. But here's the thing. Even if Russell did leave, would Verstappen actually trust that Mercedes could solve his problems with the new regulations? Because right now, his issue isn't team politics or salary. It's that he's struggling with the car's fundamental characteristics. And switching teams won't fix that unless Mercedes can build something specifically tailored to his driving style and preferences, which takes time and resources, and no guarantee of success. Let me explain this more clearly, because this is the real issue that nobody's talking about enough. Verstappen's struggles with the 2026 regulations aren't random or coincidental. According to multiple reports from engineering analysts and F1 technical experts, Verstappen's driving style, which was perfectly optimized for the previous generation of cars, doesn't naturally align with how these new cars behave. The previous regulations rewarded aggressive, twitchy inputs and drivers who could exploit the massive aerodynamic platforms available. These new regulations are more about smooth, precise inputs and working within tighter aerodynamic windows. It's not that Verstappen can't adapt, he's too skilled a driver to simply be incapable of learning new techniques, but adaptation takes time, takes experimentation, and takes a car that can provide him with the right feedback to understand what's working and what isn't. If Red Bull's car is simultaneously unreliable and not suited to his driving style, he's fighting two battles at once, and that's why his performance is suffering so dramatically. Now here's where switching to Mercedes might actually make things worse, not better. Mercedes has built their 2026 car around the driving styles of George Russell and potentially around what they think will work for Kimi Antonelli. Those cars are probably optimized for smooth, technical inputs, exactly the opposite of what Verstappen prefers. If Verstappen were to join Mercedes mid-season or in the off-season, the team would face the enormous challenge of either rebuilding their car around him or forcing him to further adapt to their existing design philosophy. Both options consume massive resources, and both options create risk. Additionally, there's no guarantee that Mercedes' technical approach is actually superior to Red Bull's. It's just different, so you might be trading one set of problems for another set of problems without actually solving anything. Furthermore, McLaren keeps getting mentioned in these conversations, and frankly, McLaren's looking pretty darn competitive right now with Lando Norris challenging for the championship, which means they might actually be a more attractive option than Mercedes if Verstappen were genuinely open to moves. At least with McLaren, you know they're building something special this season, whereas with Mercedes, you'd be going to a team that's strong, but currently led by a 20-something prospect rather than established championship machinery, which is a different calculation entirely. Norris has been performing exceptionally well in 2026, and McLaren has created an environment where Norris can thrive.